Hello, I'm William Brown. I make 18th century style furniture and I am a carver. I'd like to show you my shop today. My primary profession is an anesthesiologist. My passion is 18th century furniture. I've been doing this for about 40 years now and like to make reproduction style furniture. I do a lot of federal style, a lot of inlay and veneer. I'd like to just go through a quick tour of my shop and show you some of the things that I do here. Okay, welcome inside to my shop. It's a basement shop. It's very functional. It's evolved over years and it is a very efficient shop for me. So I'd like to start just walking through and maybe just showing some of the features of my shop. First of all is the center of the shop. If any shop is a workbench, this is a $20 Craigslist workbench. It is things I like about it are it's very narrow, so I can work all three sides. I've basically souped it up. I've added a quick release vise. I've got electrical outlets all the way around the bench. I have added a butcher block. I have all my chisels right at hand. Basically, everything I need is pretty much within arm's reach between my bench and my work space here. I've got weights down here, 80-pound Sakrete bags. It's a great way to weight down any bench. I've got some barbells on the other end, so this thing does not move. Measuring tools are over here, combination squares. I really like this little saddle square by Veritas, and I really like my Shinwa square. That's a wonderful tool. I have clamps down below, and I've got clamps hanging all around. I'll just show real quickly. I like to add these handles on my clamps. You can get these on eBay. They're made for laryngoscope, anesthesia laryngoscope blades, and I find they make really great grips. I also like to drill holes in my handles, and I'll use a screwdriver, which goes there, and it makes gives you really good leverage. You can get them tight, easy on the hands. So basically, that's pretty much my focus of my shop, my workspace. Moving over to my other side here, this is a work surface where I have all the knickknacks that I need. I do a combination of hand tools and power tools. Whatever works for me is pretty much what I use. So I find a lot of the work I do is 18th century work. A lot of it's really requires hand tools. So my favorite hand tools are Lie-Nielsen low angle jack, which I just love. I use this for everything. I sometimes will turn it upside down, put it in the vise, and you can use it as a jointer for small pieces. I use like block planes. I've got a number of different block planes that I like, rabbet planes. Really don't need much more than a few basics that really, for me, pretty much I can do everything with. I'll show you a couple things that, some little things that I think might be interesting. So let's see, let me start with, save all your credit cards, old business, old hotel keys, and I use these for glue spreaders. I cut notches in these. You can make them all different size glue spreaders. Here's an example of two business cards that I have made a dowel cutter. So basically just a wood protector to cut dowels. I use these a lot. So anyway, other things that I save, you could tell I've got Scottish ancestry. I save all these free keys you get in the mail. I actually will make different shapes. I'll grind different shapes and use them as scrapers. They work quite well. I save old wrenches and have grind the ends to make different size scrapers. Really handy for moldings. Here's an example of a screw which I've ground to a fine point, which makes a nice beading tool. I use it for Windsor chairs. So let's see. Some of the different things I like a lot. Stickfast is a wonderful cyanoacrylate glue. I like it because the tops actually work. So Starbond makes a lot of new products which I really like a lot. I use them for my veneer work. It's great for filling gaps. Another gap filler that I use very commonly and is basically sawdust. So if I'm using the oscillating spindle sander, for example, it's a great way to generate dust. I save all the dust, and the dust can be used to make a gap filling paste. So I'll just get a little bit of the dust, put it on something, piece of cardboard, get my yellow glue, mix it together, make a paste, and you can make almost perfect repairs that really can't be seen. This is Bolivian rosewood dust. That's a little bit of a unusual one. Holly, walnut, poplar, everything. I just save it all. This is black. Let's see. Moving down my bench here. Oh, this is these are electrical boxes that make really great corner clamps. They're perfectly square. You can find them just about for free, or you can buy them for cheap. And they're nice when you're making glue-up boxes or car cases. Or they're handy for that. I've got a lot of different honing. Most of my sharpening is really honing. 95% of my edge tool work is honing. So I always have a board with different honing surfaces on it. So we can actually cover that later in a tutorial. Grinding down here, this is just my very rough grinding. I use this for grinding shapes for molding scrapers. I save wide bandsaw blades and cut them into pieces. Old saw blades with good metal make great scrapers. I have different kinds of honing wheels here, which again we'll go into later. These are two apothecary chests, which are really wonderful for storing all the odds and ends that I need and keeping things out of the way. I will go into some inlay later, so I'm going to take this drawer out and we will talk about line and bury inlay if we have some time later. My bandsaw, I'll just mention, I really like the thin rip table saw jig. I find to be very, very handy. Different companies make these. You can adjust, and it's great for making very small, cutting very small strips. I actually use it for resawing as well. This is an old mailbox which I found in a dumpster. You'll see a number of the things in my shop were pulled out of dumpsters. So this is very handy. Everything in my shop is on wheels. I use this for storing different tools that I use a lot, drill bits, saws. On the back I've got clamp storage. So I keep routers in here. It's a very helpful. Let me go back to my work area for a minute. I wanted to show you a little jig I made, which I have a Festool actually sanding system. The Festool system has its own sanding discs. I get these sanding discs, which are a different brand for very cheap. So I made this little way of making these into Festool discs. I basically put the other disc in there, close this. The pattern matches the Festool exactly, so I just punch out the holes with an awl, and when I'm done, I've got a Festool disc, which I can then use with their dust collection system. Another thing I wanted to mention is these sanding blocks. They're called Prep and Weapon, and they come in, I think, 5 different colors. I love them. It's so simple, but they're really ergonomic. And what I do is I just have 4 different grits. I label them on the holder. I have strips that I've cut, so it's a very fast for me to switch out to different size. You just basically clamp these on, and really handy, really helpful. I use them all the time. This is a Tree of Life, what I call a Tree of Life chest. It's a design that is a shaker. It goes back, I think, to the 1850s, Mary Cahoon. Actually, it goes even beyond that. But I really love the design. I use it a lot. This is inlay holly on walnut. I use different local hardwoods. I cut the inlay recesses with carving tools, and each piece is cut individually. Fairly labor intensive. So we can come back to that later if we have time. I'd like to show in more depth how I make those chests. Bench hook is really handy. I've got a number of these. They're great for sawing, for cutting miters. Let me show you some of the Tree of Life chests that I've completed. I've made a number of the Tree of Life chests as prototypes, and each of those took a very long time. I have since had an order for multiple chests. They're going to different galleries. So I've developed some methods that are more production methods. Most everything I make is either a commission or something I'm just making to sell on my own, and is a one-off. But it's a little bit new for me to be making production runs. So these are components, all the pieces to make 12 of these chests. I use pretty much just local hardwoods, maple, cherry, and walnut. I really like figured woods, so most everything I use has got figure to it. I use spalted woods as well, which I really appreciate. And if we have some time later, I can get into a tutorial. I can talk about, just as an example, how I do the inlay. This would be the sides, so I've made 24 sides. I normally would do all this by hand, but I've developed some methods to, really nothing original, but I've got methods that I'm using to make it very fast and easy. So I'd like to show that a little bit later. Here are some finished Tree of Life chests. These are direct opposites. This one is black inlay on maple, so we've got black on white. This chest is holly, white inlay on walnut, so we've got light on dark. Even the ball feet, which I have glued up and then turned, are the exact opposite. I do have a box here of turnings I've made for, this is 48 ball feet. It's a William and Mary style foot, which I think is attractive. They're 12 sets of 4 feet. Each one has got different woods in the foot. I've got walnut, holly, cherry, maple, padauk. Not a local hardwood, but it's whenever I want a reddish wood, it's beautiful. And some black as well. I usually use a dyed pear wood, or I sometimes use ebony, but it is quite expensive. These chests have different, each one is a little different. This would be maybe handy as a jewelry chest, for example. I use little ebony plugs, and they slide, and I've got felt and whatnot. I also have a jig I've made, since I'm making so many of these, to inlay the latch. I can show that also later. This one has got a tray, which is a little different style. I have a third prototype chest, which is cherry, and it's got multiple colors. It's in the Curtis Gallery up in Camden, Maine. For that chest, I've used a fretwork, a tray inside, and I'm thinking about doing fretwork on a lot of these pieces that I'll be making. So I'm developing ways to do this faster as well. Let me show you a technique that I use when I have a wide board that's got some warp or cup in it. I don't have a wide jointer, I have an 8-inch jointer. And you don't really need to have a 12-inch plus jointer to flatten a piece of wood. I have found that it works quite well, and I can do this very quickly and easily, is to take my board. I use a bench dog and just get that in there and clamp it in. And I use a scrub plane, which is basically just a plane that's got a wide mouth opening and a very curved blade, so it can really hog out a lot of wood quickly. I will get a straight edge, and I'll just find where the high points are, where the low points are, mark the high points, get my scrub plane, knock out the wood. You can really rough out a lot very fast with this. Get my straight edge, and you can get it flat very quickly. Once you get it roughed out, from there you can go to fine planes, and you can have a perfectly flat board. Sometimes I'll get to the rough stage and then run it through the planer, depending on how wide the board is. But you don't have to have a 12-inch joiner to do that. So we'll move on here to a piece that I made this past year. This is a serpentine front Chippendale style chest of drawers. It's based on a piece in Alston Hall in Birmingham, England. And I worked with Tim Killen. We worked together long distance, communicating with each other, and we built this. He built one, I built one. One of the features that is really nice is that serpentine drawer front. And we will go into that later. If you are interested in how I made that, it's a very fun and interesting process. I can go into that into some detail if you want to check that out later. So this is crotch walnut veneer. The piece is walnut. I made a little more pronounced serpentine shape. I liked it a little more pronounced, so it's got a lot of bend in it. The sides are also curved. So there's some tricky steps involved in making a piece like this, but it's a fun project, and it's a really nice chest of drawers. I sell pieces, and this one is still available if anybody is interested. I will show you quickly. I've got lumber storage back here, pretty much the woods I mentioned. I don't really have any fancy lumber storage area. This works great for me. I'll bring things in from my garage and let them acclimate in here. I've got a woodworking library. Most of my library is now moved to to the coast of Maine, where I have a shop that's where I'll be teaching. I pretty much like museum books. I really love going through these, and I'm a book lover, so I can spend a lot of time getting ideas, going through books. It's great source of ideas. I have a book I want to show because I'm very proud of it. I just received this from one of the folks who will be teaching at my Maine Coast workshop. This is Graham Blackburn's, one of his latest books, and a real hand tool guru who will be actually teaching the making of a chest at our workshop up in Maine. I have a collection of hand tools. I really don't use most of these. I think they're very pretty. I've got an idea of getting them tuned up and usable. I think with what I'm doing up in Maine, these are going to all be users, hopefully soon. I've made about 50 or 60 Windsor chairs. This is a continuous arm, New York style armchair. It's had a lot of use, so it's got a lot of wear, but these hold up. These will last for generations. I love making Windsor chairs. I love the process. The hand tool work is just, it's a lot of fun. It's a great workout actually as well. This is a curly maple plane I made. Works well, and I actually do use it. I'm interested in doing I do a lot of carving. I'm interested in doing floral carving, so I'm just starting to get some turnings made, and I'm planning on doing, actually these are upside down, planning on doing floral carving on these, along the style of Dixie Biggs, who I really admire her work. Over here I have scraps. I am a saver, I admit it. I do save just about everything. Things do go to our wood stove, but I have everything divided into bins. I try to keep it organized, and it's really handy. When I need a little piece, I don't have to pull a board out and chop it up. I can almost always find what I need over here when it comes to smaller pieces. So I have it divided into 3 different sizes. These are the large bins. Down below I've got smaller sizes, mostly cherry, walnut, and maple. I've got some mahogany and poplar. Poplar is the secondary wood for almost everything I make. And up here I've got smaller pieces. I've got cock beating. I save all the extra pieces. So yeah, I'm a saver. I admit it. Up here I have my veneer collection. I do a lot of veneer work, a lot of federal style furniture. I've got some really beautiful figured veneers up here. Some of my favorites are crotch, walnut. I use a lot of maple burl. I love. I've got some. I like cherry, curly cherry, and I've even got super wavy cherry up here, which I really value that. It's beautiful wood. This is where I do my turning. It's a old Craftsman lathe. It suits my purposes. I'm a very functional turner. I've got a few things I can show you. I made a little turning tool rack, which is quite handy. The tools are just very within reach, and I can move that up out of the way. I have made, as I mentioned, Windsor chairs. This is a roller blade, which I've chopped into pieces. I've cut the wheels off, made a little base, and it is used as a spindle rest. So the spindle will go here, and as you get into thinner pieces, it can be quite you can get a lot of flex. So this keeps it rigid, and it's simple little thing that I came up with. Here is a spice box. I made about maybe 12 or 15 different styles of spice boxes. I grew up in Chester County, Pennsylvania. This was a common period piece back in the 18th century in Chester County. And my website for my personal furniture that I sell is Line and Berry, and it's because I really love the form, and I do a lot of the Line and Berry inlay. This piece is a little bit over the top. I was trying some new techniques, so I just kind of threw it all into one piece. But every piece I make, I try to push myself a little bit, try to do something new, try a new technique or two. So in this example, I was doing curved, this sort of compass inlay, which was something I hadn't really done much of before. And it's got some, these patterns are very old. They go back to mostly, I think, to the Welsh who settled in the Delaware Valley and Chester County area. There were also English and Dutch and influences as well. But these patterns were mostly Welsh-based. This piece, I like to experiment and come up with different patterns that I think are pleasing to the eye. So these are the lines and these are the berries. Again, all the local hardwoods that they would have used originally. The yellow is Osage orange, the white is holly, the dark is a walnut. I did a few things that I hadn't seen before. I carved a fan in here. There was space for it, so I carved that. And I used curly cherry for the veneer, the veneered fronts. All these spice boxes are full of secret compartments. This one has 4 secret compartments. I'll be showing you later. I'll be going over a pretty elaborate spice box I made. It's a Chippendale box on a stand, and it's got about 14 secret compartments in it. It was just a lot of fun. I just used every potential space, so we'll go through that later, and you'll get some idea about the secret compartments, which will no longer be secret. So it'll be fun to show those. Some of my power tools: 15-inch planer. I have an 8-inch jointer, table saw, and I've got a lot of things laid out that I wanted to show again if we have time later, or a separate tutorial which will be linked to this video, where I'd like to go through some of my methods for making stringing and different types of banding, different types of inlay. Here's a box that's got my berries for Line and Berry, and I've got different sizes of holly, cherry, walnut, Osage orange, and some Padauk over here. I wanted to mention that I've been hearing holly is getting hard to find. Here in Virginia, it's quite plentiful, and I am making lots of holly veneer, 16th-inch veneer. I make lots of holly stringing, and we'll go through how I size that and how I do the inlay. But I wanted to mention it is available on my website if folks are having a hard time. I sell the holly, and I can make the stringing, and I've got lots of it available. So let's move on to my process, how I plan a piece and how I make my furniture. I use resources on the internet. I use my library. I get ideas. I work by commission, and I also make pieces for galleries and just pieces for my own enjoyment. I will show you my process. It's probably different from a lot of folks, but it works for me. I keep folders on every project. Here's an example of a folder for a William & Mary spice box, which I no longer have. It's not in my possession. Here's a picture of the final product. This made it into popular woodworking, and also was in the Messler Gallery up in Rockport, Maine, is in fine woodworking as well. It's a William & Mary spice box. So what I do is I start off by just making a general sketch that just to get some dimensions, maybe hard to see, but I just want to get the general proportion, look at pictures, draw things out, get an idea what it'll look like. And then I start cutting pieces and just start making the piece. I do make little sketches all along the way where I will try to get good proportions. This would be, looks like a door, a frame and panel door. Here's some copies of some pictures that I use as inspiration. The details I will draw out on little scraps of paper. I make little templates for different parts. So this would be for the some of the curved cock beading. And so here are the just ideas I sketch out on paper that trying to get pleasing proportions for the drawers inside, for example. Sometimes for moldings, I always draw a little sketch first, something that looks good, and then I just go ahead and make it. I'll custom size scrapers to make the, I like deep recesses in my moldings. Here's a template for the undercarriage, probably very hard to see, but sometimes I'll have to get really exact proportions. Anyway, that's a rough idea of how I work. Here's that Chester County spice box. I did make a pretty exact pattern for the front because this required a lot of hand tool work with radius cutters, and I use this actually to lay out my cutters on the front. And again, here's a pattern for one of the feet, one of the OG bracket feet. Little sketches for the different parts. Getting the fan worked in was a little tricky, so had to think that through. Secret compartments, where they're going to lie, things like that. This is a actual piece that I use as kind of an inspiration, very close to what I made. Lee Ellen Joyner wrote a book or a doctoral thesis, and I've used that a lot. She's done the kind of definitive research on these spice boxes, and it's a great source for patterns and ideas. I do a lot of carving. It's the other side of my woodworking that I really enjoy. I like to do folk style carving. I do a lot of Bellamy eagles. I'm going through a series of Bellamy's more complex eagles, and they can be 4 or 5 feet wide. We'll be showing those later when we go through the tour in my home. So just some examples of the type of carvings that I do. I really like the swordfish motif. It's just a pretty shape. I do gold leaf a lot of my carvings. This has got 23 karat gold leaf. These are a couple that are in progress that are primed. Here's a very large swordfish that'll, basically this would go on a wall somewhere. I've got a mortise and tenon fin here, which will go in like that. Pineapples. Here's a soaring eagle. John Haley Bellamy was a carver in Kittery, Maine, in Portsmouth area, New Hampshire. His eagles were carved in the late 1800s, and I am one of the carvers that does his style, and I really make those for galleries and make them for sale. And A lot of times you'll see the banner on the eagle, which can be personalized, so folks like that. Here's some other carvings. I've got a rooster in progress. These are basically roughed out carvings that I have not yet started the fine detail. This is a soaring eagle, so-called the Bellamy style soaring eagle. I do swans. So here's a swan in progress. I've got a couple swan heads that'll go on, and you can see how these are very much a kind of a country folk style, which I really like, and they'll be painted to try to get sort of a vintage, a vintage look to it. Here's a completed, I do a lot of these codfish. These are very popular in New England. A lot of my stuff is nautical, maritime-based carvings. This again is gold leafed. This is what the, I'll show you some that are in progress that have been roughed out. But this is a completed cod with the scales and the fins. I like to do a little curve in the tail. Gives it some interest as if it's moving. Over here I have a whole school of fish actually that are in progress. This one's ready to attach fins into, this is walnut, ready for fins and for the detail work. I've probably got about 12 of them going on down here. Here's another one in walnut. I use mahogany, sometimes figured woods like curly maple, which are it's very hard to carve, but it's a real pretty end result. Here is a rather large Bellamy eagle, which again has just been roughed out. But this eagle is, I don't know, it's about 4 feet wingspan. And these are very elaborately painted and gold leafed, and again, I'll show some of the final products when we do the other with a tour. Here's the head that'll go on this eagle, and that needs a lot of carving. I use basswood or pine for most of my carvings. Usually it's 2-inch. For the high points, I'll glue up pieces. So this eagle would have a glued up wing, and then an extra piece, which is 2 pieces actually glued up to get the proper relief. All right. Here are my, the tools I use for roughing out an eagle are essentially my Windsor chair tools. I've tried to do some power grinding and whatnot, but I frankly find this is quicker and much less noisy and much less messy. So I'll go through these quickly, but this is a gutter adze used in the 18th century and earlier, going way back, for making wooden gutters and for hollowing out wooden things, wooden items. These are draw knives, which I've got an assortment which are used for shaving, and you can take off a lot of wood quickly with that. This is a draw knife that's got adjustable handles, which is handy when you just have to have that one handle out of the way to get in a cramped area. This is a scorp, called a scorp, S-C-O-R-P. It's basically you can scoop out a lot of wood quickly with that. Great for Windsor chair seats. These are spoke shaves, which I have all different kinds, but they're for more refined roughing out. And my mallets over here, I'll use heavy gouges, and this one is not like the others. It's a modern tool. It's called a Shinto rasp, it's an inexpensive tool, which is, I love it. I use it a lot. You can get a lot of wood out of that, roughed out. Carving tools, I keep these in rolls. Let me show you how I set up my bench when I'm carving. I made these stands, and I've got a lot of these. I can, if anybody's interested, I can let you know how I make them, but they're very simple. It's just a hinge and a couple scraps of wood. I've got Harbor Freight magnets, and you can make one of these in 15 minutes. When I'm carving, I can get all my tools on this, whatever I happen to be using. I can just stick them on there, and they're right in front of me. I can see them. They're not all over the place. It takes up very little room. So I came up with that, and I find it to be really helpful when I'm carving. So that's my shop. I'd like to take you upstairs to show you some of my completed pieces up in our home. We will be doing that as a separate video, so if you subscribe to the channel, you can see that. There'll also be some tutorials that will cover some of the different skills that I use to make some of my furniture. So hopefully, if anyone makes their way up to the coast of Maine, I'll be having classes up there, as I mentioned, in Camden, and we'll have some amazing instructors. We'd love to have you join us. Let's go upstairs.
If you're interested in woodworking with a mix of hand tools and power tools, visit my website at woodandshop.com, where you can find a bunch of free woodworking lessons, workshop tours of amazing woodworkers, and our very popular tool buying guides. Make sure you subscribe to my free newsletter and check out my 10 steps for getting started in woodworking. Enjoy!